All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're here tonight to talk about intellectual property protections and how that relates to the doll show and artists and artist rights. This is not legal advice, and this is not attorney-client privilege. I'm not your attorney yet, but if you need help, talk to me later. The first question you might be thinking is, why do I care about intellectual property? Why is this something that is important, and why does it matter to me? On the left-hand side, we have a wonderful photograph. This is a bountiful baby photograph. And on the right-hand side, we have a counterfeit website. And this is a website operated by some people in China. And they're using this photograph to sell counterfeit dolls here in the United States. Here's another photograph. Again, these are really high-quality photographs. That's why people steal them. And on the right-hand side, we have another counterfeit website that is using these really high-quality photographs that artists have taken to sell their counterfeit goods. Here's a third example. We have an amazing sculpture on the left-hand side. This is original. It's really special. And on the right-hand side, we have someone who's just taken this sculpture and they're using it to sell their own products. They're making money off of someone else's work. This is a bountiful baby sculpture that is being used to sell a product on Amazon. But this is not a bountiful baby product. This is a counterfeit. Someone has stolen this, and they're using Amazon to get these products out to a really wide audience. So I hope we're starting to see why intellectual property matters. And the reason it matters is it's the only thing that protects your rights as an artist. So that's why we should care. Now let's talk a little bit more about how we can use intellectual property to protect our rights. So let's start with talking about what kinds of intellectual property there are. We often hear about copyrights and patents and trademarks, but few people really know what they are. So let's talk about the basics. Copyright is a creative work. So this can be all kinds of things. It can be software. It can be Microsoft Word. It can be a photograph that you take. It can be a doll sculpture. It can be music that's written. It can be the same music that's performed. That's why when you see, like Weird Al Yankovic does a song that is similar to someone else's song, he has to actually get the copyright to do that performance because they own the copyright in the music. But if you remember one thing tonight, copyright protects creative works, all kinds of creative works. Now here's some details about copyright. These are important. So copyright covers original works of authorship. And copyright vests at the moment of creation. So when your 5-year-old is drawing a great picture with crayons, they own the copyright in that picture the moment they draw it. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to do anything special. Now, there are some things that come with it if you register it that can help protect your rights, but you own that copyright the moment you create something. The duration of copyright is lifetime plus 70 years. And it's funny, the duration keeps changing as the copyrights on Disney cartoons start running out. They keep changing the laws to extend them a little bit and a little bit. So, and the standard is minimal creativity. So, if you've got a line and a circle, that's probably not enough. But if you've got something that you've created by taking time to draw a picture, you can be a bad artist and it's still protected. And it can protect all kinds of things. Sometimes I've seen people that have taken, very complex scans of things in the real world and put those together. That's copyright protectable. Any original work of authorship is protectable. So here's some examples of actual copyrighted works. Here we have a sculpture. So this is a sculpture that was created from a real baby, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, and that creativity is protectable by copyright. Here we have a photo. Photos are absolutely protectable. Now, obviously some photos are better than others. We think, Ansel Adams versus me. There's a difference, but they're all protectable. And then here we have artwork. We have someone who has painted on the doll sculpture. Now, what I like about this example here is we've got two different kinds of copyright in that artwork. On the one hand, we have the sculpture copyright, and on the other, we have the artwork on top of it. You know, it's kind of like the music. I can write the sheet music for a song, and someone else can perform it. There's two copyrights there because we have the music and we have the performance. We've got some music that's been written. We've got the Windows software. We've got movies. These are all examples of things that are protected by copyright. And we think of the value in these works of art. You know, movies and music and artwork are some of the most valuable things in society. So copyright is very, very important. It's in the Constitution, actually, to protect those works for a limited time, the Constitution says. Patents are different. Patents are for inventions, and they can be for designs, ornamental designs. But typically when we talk about a patent, we're talking about an invention. So, maybe you invented a new bicycle or a new light bulb or a new radio. Those are things that you would protect with a patent. These are some of the most valuable trademarks probably in our country. I think Apple is actually the most valuable in the world. And they're very recognizable. And that is the value in a trademark. It's a source identifier. Trademarks don't expire. And the reason they don't expire is a trademark protects the public. So when you buy a phone or a computer with that Apple logo on it, you know something about what you're buying already, right? Because they have a reputation for quality. Or Coca-Cola, you know what you're getting. So trademarks don't expire, unlike patents, which expire after 20 years, and copyrights, which are life plus 70. United States Code 17 U.S.C. 106 sets forth what the rights are that you have in a copyright. And I've kind of condensed it down a little bit here. You've got the rights to reproduce the work. So, for example, if you've made a photo, you've got the right to make copies of that photo and sell them. You've got the right to prepare derivative works. So, for example, I've created a photo and I don't like how the colors turned out. And so I want to change the colors. I want to brighten them up and maybe sharpen the image. I have that right in copyright to create derivative works. Let's say I have a product and I want to add a logo to it. I have that right under copyright because I'm creating a derivative work of this copyrighted artwork. You have the right to sell and distribute copies. So that's why we get concerned when we see people selling counterfeits, because they're violating this right to sell or distribute copies. And you also have the right to perform or display the work. If it's a play, or if it's a sonata, or if it's some other thing that can be performed or displayed, you have the right to display it. And this also applies to things that are, if you've got a sculpture that you've made, you've got the right to display that. Is it infringement? Someone's going to make copies of Microsoft software and sell them on the internet. Does that sound like infringement? Yeah, that's absolutely infringement. It's absolutely infringement. And here's why. So it's infringement because Microsoft has the right to reproduce the work, and they have the right to sell or distribute copies. So that's why it's infringement. Here's another one. Is it infringement to use someone else's photo to sell products on the internet? It's absolutely. That is infringement as well. And here's why. Because the person who owns the copyright has the right to reproduce that image. And so when someone else takes it and uses it to sell their own products, obviously that's not okay. They also have the right to display their own copyrighted work. You're going to make a YouTube video and you've got a bunch of counterfeit products that you bought on Amazon. Does that sound like infringement? Absolutely, that is infringement as well. And you guys already know why, right? Because we did this before. You've got the right to display your own works. And so people can't, make copies and then go do things with them and say, oh, I'm just, it wasn't me that made the copy, I'm just displaying it. So when you own the copyright, you own all of these rights in your own work. Counterfeit reborn dolls on Amazon. And this is an actual counterfeit doll that I took a screenshot off off of Amazon. Does that sound like copyright infringement?
Yes.
Absolutely it's infringement. And we know why. Because you have the right to reproduce your own work, you have the right to prepare derivative works, you have the right to, this all checks all the boxes, right? And actually, you probably also have the right to perform or display your own copyrighted work. So that is absolutely infringement. So, all right, you've got these rights. What can you do about it? That's the real question, right? How do I stop it? So you've got some different options. The first option you have is to register your copyrights. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what it does. You can send what's called a DMCA notice. The DMCA is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and this is a notice that tells someone they're infringing your copyright and they need to remove the infringing materials. And then the third thing you can do is copyright litigation, and this is kind of the more extreme thing, but this involves going to court. So let's talk a little about each of these. All right, so copyright registration. This is something that you do with the Copyright Office. It involves paying a fee, telling the Copyright Office a little about your work, who the creator is, who owns it, what date it was created, and then you're going to give them what's called a deposit or deposit materials. You're going to actually send them a copy of your image or a photo of your sculpture or perhaps your sheet music. And one of the funny things I found is Microsoft, they've got copyright in the code for Windows. How do they submit copies of their code to the Copyright Office? Well, the truth is they actually submit the code and they punch a bunch of funny holes in it so that you can't actually reproduce it, but that's how they submit their deposit materials for copyrighted source code, and they send it to the Copyright Office. And you pay a fee. The fee is relatively small, compared to other legal fees you might pay for trademarks or patents. I think it's around $50, and you can pay, if you have to do it quickly, this takes maybe 6 months. If you have to do it quickly, you can pay an expedited fee of like $800, and then it happens like literally overnight. It's very fast. What comes back is a copyright registration. It looks just like this. It has a number, it has a signature, it tells you this is for one of Bountiful Baby's works. The title is 3-Month Joseph Asleep Head. Tells us the year of completion, 2018, the nation of publication. It's a sculpture. Was it a work made for hire? Yes. Who's the owner? These are the details that come back from the Copyright Office. There's a really important reason you'd register your copyrights, and it's damages. When you have a copyright registration and you sue someone for infringing your copyright, you can obtain what are known as statutory damages. Because the Copyright Office recognizes, someone stole your song and they played it at their birthday party. What is that worth? Or someone stole your doll and you don't know how many copies they sold. And so this gives you another way to prove up what the damages are, and it's up to $150,000 per infringing work. And what's interesting here is there have been some cases where a person made unauthorized copies of a copyrighted magazine, and what the court held was every single image in that magazine was a work, and the damage were millions and millions of dollars because the scale of the infringement was so great. So the statutory damages are a big thing, and then there's another part. You can also get your attorney's fees if you win. So that's the other real reason that you would want to register your copyright. I suppose there's another reason I didn't say. If you're from the United States and you want to file suit, you have to have a copyright registration. The other thing you can do, this is a much lower key, this is very simple, everyone can do this. If someone's infringing your work, you can send what's called a DMCA notice. That essentially tells them, hey, you're infringing my stuff and you need to take it down. So we've got to do some things. We've got to tell them what's your work, what's the counterfeit or the copy that's unauthorized, and you have to make a statement that it's accurate and that the use is not authorized, and you have to sign it. Pretty straightforward. So here is an example of a DMCA notice. And the interesting thing with a DMCA notice is you don't have to have a registration. So, if you're a small doll maker and you've got just a few dolls and you haven't spent the money to register and someone is stealing your goods, you can send this notice. And you can send this to Google or YouTube or eBay or Amazon, and they will respect it. They take these very seriously. It's very simple. You have to tell them what we're talking about here. I am the owner, in this case, I have a registration. I am the owner of copyright number such and such attached. But for my clients that don't have registrations, we'll just tell the other side, I own the copyright in this image. And then this video includes an unauthorized reproduction of my work and then maybe you tell them where. Or if it's Amazon, maybe you tell them the listing of where the property is. This use of the material is not authorized. The information, this is a little certification you have to provide because you're asking them to take a legal action, basically. So you're going to say, this is accurate, it's under penalty of perjury, and I'm authorized to make this complaint. And I must have signed that statement maybe 1,000 times, on behalf of my clients. You do want to be very careful. I have an interesting story. I have a client, and he is a creator, and he had made some products, and he made some product listings. And another company went out and they stole his product descriptions, and they stole the images. And then they sold their company to someone else. And that new company went and they filed a DMCA notice with Amazon against my client. And they said, all of this stuff, you copied our listing, you copied our pictures, except it wasn't true, right? They had it backwards. They got it wrong. There are penalties in the statute for providing a false DMCA notice. So you got to be careful. Now, this is not a big deal if someone stole your stuff. Just be careful that you're accurate, but it's a big problem if you get it wrong. So next, let's talk about litigation. Litigation is kind of the most extreme of the ways to deal with copyright infringement. And I've got some pros and cons listed here. So number one pro is litigation, it's going to vindicate your copyright. Someone has taken they've taken your images or your sculptures. Litigation is the real way to solve it. You're going to leverage the power of the U.S. District Court. You're going to get a federal judge involved, and they're going to help you deal with the counterfeiters and help you solve this problem. It sends a strong message, right? People are not going to want to mess with you. They're not going to steal your stuff if you're going to take them to court. People, they shape up pretty quick. There's a big possible recovery, and there's complications that go with getting damages and finding the money, and you can get a judgment, but you still have to collect. But there's some big possible recoveries out there if you can sue these counterfeiters. The downsides, it can be expensive. My rates are not cheap, so that is a downside. It can be expensive. The outcomes are never certain. You never know exactly what's going to happen. Sometimes you have people that show up and fight. Sometimes you have people that run away and they don't fight. We had one case where it was a copyright case, and the other side, they were operating out of China, and they were stealing television signals, and they were stripping out the copyright protection and rebroadcasting it all over the world. And we sued them, and they didn't show up. And we got a huge judgment, $100 million against the bad guys. They didn't show up. They didn't think we knew where their money was. But then we found their bank account, and we started taking some of their money, and then they showed up, and then they wanted to, talk about this case that they didn't fight originally. They ultimately lost. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, who turned them down. But you never know what's going to happen. Crazy things can happen. And then the last downside of litigation is even if you win a big number, it can be hard to collect. You've got to find the money for the bad guys. And if the bad guys don't have any money, then you can't collect. So let's talk a little bit about what you have to prove for a copyright case. And copyright infringement it's very simple. There's two basic parts to proving a copyright case. Some cases have lots to prove. This is simple. Number one, you got to prove ownership of a valid copyright. And the Supreme Court says it has to be registered in order to file suit. So remember the registration certificate we talked about earlier? That's proof that you own a valid copyright. And then the second thing you have to prove is copying. Copying of constituent elements of the work that are original. So we've got some more examples there. Here's an example of copying. And if you look on the left side, this is the original sculpture that has been registered, a registered copyright. And here we have the counterfeit. And if you look at those two sculptures, we had a federal judge here in Utah recently who decided that this image was copied from, or this sculpture was copied from this one. And he had the benefit of having two dolls, the original sculpture in one hand and the counterfeit in the other. And he looked at them both and said, yeah, absolutely, they're copies. And that's what you have to prove. That is your litigation case. So what do you get if you win? What do you get if you win your copyright case? So you probably know this, but there's no damages for just registering the copyright. That doesn't get you anything. And the DMCA notice, that's just about taking the work down off the website or taking it down so that it's no longer infringing. There's no damages there. But if you go to court, there are damages. So if we have a registered copyright, we can choose between our actual harm and the statutory damages. Remember we talked about $150,000 of work? You think Microsoft wants $150,000 for the guy that sold, 10 million copies of Windows? No. Microsoft is going to want their actual damages. And then, they could get that actually if they hadn't registered the copyright when they first, when the work first came out. But then you also get your attorney's fees. So, and here I've just outlined the different damages. It's up to $30,000 per work for someone that infringes, or up to $150,000 if it's willful. And what does it mean to be willful? If someone were to accidentally, maybe they found your image and they thought it was free to use and it wasn't, then maybe that's a smaller number. But when we see counterfeiting, where someone steals your company name and steals your product, that's willful. Willful is egregious, and kind of the judges see that it's kind of like when your kids are being naughty and it's on purpose, or they just tired. That's the difference. So here's some examples, right? We've got let's say this case, we've got two works that are copied and they're being used on these websites to sell counterfeit dolls. Well, I would say, I would ask the judge for $150,000 a piece, because clearly it's not accidental when someone steals your product and they put it on their website and they use it to sell their own goods. So I think your damages there are going to be probably up close to the $300,000 mark. Now let's look at what an actual damages might be. And so what we look at here is, how have they harmed your business? So, all right, we've got, and these are just, I made these numbers up, but all right, we got a doll head here, we sell it, and we make $30 profit on each one. And we have a counterfeiter over here who sold 15,000 counterfeits. Well, we would do the math and we would say, well, we would have sold those 15,000 at $30. That would have been $450,000. So that's what you'd ask the court for, is $450,000. And the analysis might be a little more complicated than that, but at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. How much did they sell and how much profit would you have made? That's your damages. Are there any questions that people have or anything comes to mind? Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about the damages and the possibility of them, but you also said that in a previous screen that it could be hard to collect. So you can ask for that, but how do you know if you're going to get any, or what? How do you collect or know what they have to give you? And
That's a fantastic question, probably the most important question of the whole evening. So you have to know your opponent. So are they a corporation, right? For example, if this were, hypothetically, it's a huge public corporation in the United States, and they have $1 billion in assets. If you go after them, I'm not concerned about collecting if you win. But let's say there's some podunk counterfeiter in the middle of wherever, they're in Nebraska. So you're going to go, and I'll tell you what I would do. I would look at who my defendant is. I would look to see what kind of assets they have. I'd look to see what their job is. I'd look to see, do they own their house? I had a case that just ended where a gentleman is on the East Coast. We got a judgment against him for several $100,000, and I went and I looked to see where does he live, what houses does he own, what corporations in that state does he own, what assets do they own, understanding kind of the universe of resources that are available to pay that judgment. Now let's say they're not in the US, they're outside the United States, and you're wondering, well, what assets do they have? How do I collect in China? Well, in that the case I talked about before with the $100 million judgment, we knew they had, this is a great story, there were computers that they were using to gather and steal the satellite signals and send them around the world. And those computers are in California, and we got an order from a judge in Texas seizing those computers, and we had our techs look at them, and they were able to determine they were sending the money to a Hong Kong bank account. So guess where we went to try to get our money? We found $15 million in that Hong Kong bank account. So that's one way, is if you know they have a bank account. And so if we have a person in China, or let's say that's counterfeiting, I'm going to go look and see what assets they have. How are they doing business? Where are they receiving money? What kind of money do they have, and what's available to pay that judgment? Because you're right, if you get a big judgment and you can't collect, it's not worth very much. But there is one thing that you can get. You can get two things out of a court. You can get a money damages, which you can collect. And you can also get an injunction, and there's a lot of value in an injunction. And an injunction is the court telling someone not to do something. So, for example, we had a case for Bountiful Baby where we stopped some counterfeiters, and we got an injunction out of Judge Parrish here in the Utah District Court, and she told the other side to stop doing something. They didn't listen, but she told Amazon, you've got to stop hosting these websites. And they were using another hosting provider, and she told them, you've got to stop hosting these websites. And guess what? All those websites went down, and they've never come back up, because we got an order from a federal judge telling these companies that were helping them that they had to stop.
What if they just build another website?
Well, then, so there's a couple things you could do. They build another website. You can go, if it's not clear that it's connected, then you might have to file another lawsuit. If it's connected, then you go back to the first judge and say, they're disobeying your order, and you should enter some contempt sanctions against them, which would shut them down. So you're touching on all the points that are difficult about this, and that's exactly right. But there are ways to help them stop.
Okay, and then another question: can you seize money that's only in the United States, or do you have the jurisdiction to be able to hunt them down in China, for instance, for the county?
So a U.S. court will only have jurisdiction over monies that are in the United States. But a couple of things. First off, we see a lot of money go through the United States that can be seized. And the second thing is, a number of countries have agreed to a treaty that allows you to enforce judgments around the world. So once you have a judgment, like that judgment we got in the satellite TV case, we went to Hong Kong and were able to seize the money in Hong Kong. So China, I think China's I think that getting money out of a Chinese bank account is going to be more difficult. But Hong Kong, Europe, I think that is much more doable.
What are the easiest countries?
It's going to be your EU countries. The UK, Germany, France, all the EU countries are going to be.
The Asian countries, which ones are the easiest?
Hong Kong is the easiest for sure.
What about Latin America?
I've not had a lot of experience in Latin America, so I don't know. Probably Brazil is top of the list.
Why do you say Brazil?
Because I've litigated in Brazil and have had some success there. So,
Okay.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for your time.
yeah, excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.